Today's classical conversation is a showcase of the album Point Cloud by David Crowell, who's a composer, saxophonist, and guitarist. So if you're looking for something fresh to add to your classical contemporary playlist, you'll definitely want to stick around to hear what he's got to say about Point Cloud. With that, David, I want to welcome you. And it's great to speak with you today.
Great to speak with you as well. Happy to be here.
So where does this album, Point Cloud, fall in your overall discography? And I ask because I'm curious to know about where we might have come across your work before.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple sort of different streams, I guess you could say, of musical interests, and so I've released albums with my band Empyrean Atlas, which is a quintet with three guitars, electric bass, and drums, and that's a different sound. It's kind of a hybrid sound, I guess. And then I've also released music as a saxophonist, which explores, my jazz side a little bit more. This album is a composer record. It's my pieces for other ensembles, including sandbox percussion and great guitarist Dan Lapel and Mark Grigic and singing cellist Eva Kasian-Lakos. So it's collaborations with musicians and people that I've known for a long time. I would say it, most generally speaking, falls into the contemporary classical realm.
Let's go ahead and get the rundown. There are 4 featured works, and if you want to touch on each one of them briefly.
Sure. Yeah, the first one is called Verses for a Liminal Space, and this is a percussion piece for the percussion quartet Sandbox Percussion, which is a Brooklyn-based ensemble. I've been working with them for at least 10 years, I think. Several pieces. I've worked with one of their percussionists, Ian Rosenbaum, on a solo piece as well. So yeah, this work is, as the title suggests, 3 separate verses, kind of, not exactly movements, but exploring this idea of liminal space, where you kind of find yourself in a sort of musical environment, and you kind of look around and you enjoy it. There's not a sense of certainly there's some elements of development and kind of a traditional way of thinking about it, but it's also kind of an in-between space for people to sort of soak their ears or something. I don't know. So then that's that. Point Cloud is a piece I wrote for Dan Lapel, who's a great guitar player and friend that I've known for a while now, and we've worked on a number of things as well. And this piece is for multiple electric guitars and nylon string guitars, and it's kind of loosely modeled on Steve Reich's Electric Counterpoint, which is a piece that I've always loved. So I wouldn't say it sounds exactly like that, but the same idea of multiple multiple guitars, and the piece can be performed as a soloist with a track, like Electric Counterpoint is. Also, like Electric Counterpoint, it can be performed live with a full ensemble, though it would be significantly harder to pull off, I think. Yeah, Pacific Coast Highway is a short piece for a duo of Dan Lapel and Slovenian guitarist Mark Grigic, who's really amazing as well. Yeah, that's moving from electric nylon world to strictly nylon string, so very classical sound there. And the final piece, 2 Hours in Zadar, is kind of chronicling a trip that the singing cellist in the piece, Eva Kasian-Lakos, and I took to Zadar in Croatia, which is where the Zadar sea organ is, which is a really fascinating natural instrument that essentially plays the ocean, basically. The first half, it's about a 10-minute piece. The first half of the piece is every single sound is actually electronically manipulated versions of Eva's voice, plus her singing, live. The second half, and that's done through some granular synthesis with a particular instrument that I like to use. for that. And the second half, you actually hear that C organ sample. You're not going to hear it too obviously, but it is there, and it's also very much manipulated as well. And so there's also a few other samples in there. There's like some cricket samples, which is very typical of Croatia in the summer, and but it's not presented so obviously. It's kind of mixed in with the sound world and a little bit disguised in terms of the original sound of the C organ, which is magnificent. You can probably find videos of it on YouTube if any of your listeners are interested.
Yeah, I'm imagining the sea organ playing the ocean, as you say, and I guess kind of the randomness of the waves as they come in. So is randomness something that you were thinking about in the creative process?
Not really. Not for this piece. That is what makes the C organ so special. I mean, it's a it's a 24-hour instrument. You know, it never stops playing. So, and it of course does change quite dramatically. It's the musical output of it changes quite dramatically based on the weather. You know, how strong or the waves are or not, and the strength with which it triggers certain pitches and all these things. It's really like an unbelievable thing to experience. I think that in the piece, the sound is pretty ordered, but there is a sense of kind of a wandering or a discovery that I think you could sort of connect to that idea. And of course, you know, the C organ itself is in there, and so that's bringing some sense of randomness into the piece just by its very nature.
Yeah, and how wonderful that you were able to compose based on that personal experience actually being there. Is that the case also for Pacific Coast Highway? Were you working from personal experience driving on the Pacific Coast Highway?
Yeah. I mean, I'm from California. Well, I'm from a few places, but California is one of them. And so, yeah, I used to tour quite a bit around California, and so I would often, like after the end of a tour, rent a car and kind of just do my thing for a few days, and that often involved driving at some point on the Pacific Coast Highway or Highway 1, depending on whether you're in Northern or Southern California. So yeah, I think the piece has that kind of I don't know. It has that motoric feel to it. In terms of that's kind of the obvious connection to the road, but there's also this sort of there's a forward momentum and kind of like a hint of nostalgia in it also, which I think is something that you can kind of associate with great road trips that you take.
Then following up on Point Cloud, the piece, and not the album, of course, is called Point
Yeah.
Cloud, but I'm thinking about the piece specifically. And there is a music video that goes with that. I watched it, and you see
Yeah.
these different colors of clouds colliding and overlapping. What do you feel like the multimedia experience adds to Point Cloud?
Yeah, I mean, I made that video basically with that idea in mind, which is that there's a series of sort of cloud shots that I use throughout, but it's kind of referencing the counterpoint in the piece itself. You have a certain number of parts, and they appear in different ways throughout the work. So this kind of shading of color is obviously has a direct connection to music. I mean, in music, we always talk about timbre or color and those kinds of things. And in art or video, it's a more obvious thing to talk about. In music, it's a little more sort of subjective or ambiguous. But definitely, there's that connection of thinking about the counterpoint of the clouds and the sort of colors they can create.
One thing I noticed too about this album that I find really unique, not only did you compose all of the music, but you also produced and mixed it. So what do you feel like that element, did that help you to sculpt it even further? And what was involved with that process?
Absolutely helps. Yeah, I've been mixing and doing audio work for about I started about 10 years ago, and so I do all my own music, And it's, at first I was sort of experimenting on my music, teaching myself how to do it. At this point, I feel like very competent, and it's actually become a source of creativity that you can bring to the recordings, and an extra element of specificity. The thing that I've had, great people mix my work before, and there's many amazing mixers out there, but the thing I learned is that no one will spend the amount of time on it that you will. If you understand the art and how to work in that realm, then it does give you that extra bit of creativity and specificity that you can bring to the recordings themselves. The live performance and recordings are obviously a different medium, and so I do treat recordings as its own kind of art, rather than as a strictly documentation of a performance, say.
Is there anything else that I'm missing or that you'd like to share about Point Cloud?
That's pretty good. We covered a lot, and please go listen. It's coming out, as your listeners will be aware, May 3rd, this Friday. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, from here, we'll leave it in the hands of our listeners, in the ears of
Sounds
our
good.
listeners. But
Yep.
congratulations on the release, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time as well.